Welcome, Army fans. This is Joe Iacono with GoBlackKnights.com, along with a special guest from the University of Georgia rival site, UGA Sports, Radi Nabulsi. How you doing today, Roddy?
Doing fantastic. Very glad to be on with you.
Great. Well, we are honored to have you. Always great when we can get a guest from the SEC, one of the P5 schools or P4 schools now. So really exciting for the Army fan base. We have a lot of college football diehards. Always say most Army fans have two teams. We love the Black Knights, and then you have the team where you grew up or that you
Right.
root for because you live there, or your kids went to school there, or whatever the case may be. I'm 45 minutes from Athens in Titletown, aka Buford, Georgia. So big Georgia Bulldogs fan here as well. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to working with rivals and working with the program down there at UGA and the Dogs.
Well, I went to UGA. It was my third choice. I thought I was going to go to like some art school. I was a kind of the hippie growing up, and then I grew up and ended up going to University of Georgia. Started working for the team as the team photographer. Graduated. They asked me to come back, and so I stayed the team photographer for years, and then wound up going to Rivals, then to ESPN, then back to Rivals. So I've been all over. Been doing this since 1993. So it's been quite the journey of covering the University of Georgia, and I've seen all the changes. I was there when they brought in Jim Donnan, then Mark Richt on to Kirby Smart, and I keep trying to tell people right now, this is the golden age of Georgia football. You had 13 guys
Yeah.
drafted last week. You've had back-to-back national titles. A down year was considered winning the SEC the first time I had 16 teams in it, with the most ridiculous schedule of all time. And I'm like, and when people complain about it, I'm like, you don't understand how good you have it.
You have it right now. I
This is
know
as
that's
good
one of the
as
funny
it
things
can
about
get,
being a fan of like a smaller G5 school that struggled for a long time up until recently is whenever, living in the South, whenever I talk to my SEC buddies or Clemson buddies and they start whining about 11 and 2 seasons and I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, shut up. Just stop. Just shut up."
Exactly. So uh, I'm blessed to do it. I'm lucky. Uh, I have a son who goes to the University of North Georgia. It's one of the other senior military colleges, one of the
Oh,
six.
nice. I
Um,
worked for my first duty station at Fort Hood. I worked for an S3 who was a UNG grad. So it's awesome.
he's doing that. He did dive school last summer, a combat dive with a bunch of the West Point cadets.
Awesome.
They had a blast. He actually made it. He's the first one at UNG to get through.
Nice.
Uh, this year, he's going to jungle, um, then advanced camp, then sapper. So
Awesome. Well, he is definitely not picking the easy route, so good
a
for
little
him.
psychopath
Those are
doing it all
all
before
really
he even
challenging
commissioned.
schools.
So
I have a bunch of friends
anyway,
who
the
did
reason I bring
Sapper.
that up is not to, well, A, to brag because he's my boy, but mainly because, he's all these schools he goes to, he runs into all the cadets from West Point and has nothing but respect for them. And he's like, Dad, those guys are special. They are,
Awesome.
those men and women are just different. And so I have more of appreciation for West Point than I ever did, mainly because of the stories he tells me when he comes back from, these camps and competitions, and I'm like, oh, okay. So
Very
again, you
cool.
can
Yeah. And
appreciate it from afar, but then when you start hearing the details of what they go through, it's a whole new level of appreciation.
well, that's an awesome story, and your son sounds like he's doing great. I'm sure he probably knows a number of Army football players because a bunch of those guys have branched infantry and go to some of those really difficult schools that you mentioned. So that's really cool. So, Roddy, on the topic of Elo Mendoza, one of Georgia's newest kind of wins in the transfer portal recently that came from Army, which is really wild. We had two players actually go to Power Four schools this year in a portal, which you don't typically see. A lot of times when kids transfer out of Army, they're playing at an FCS school or a G5 school or something like that. So, tell me if I'm off or close on my guesstimation surrounding what might have occurred with Army's Elo Mendoza jumping into the portal and eventually committing to the Dogs. along with signing an NIL deal. Here's my guess, kind of in the current portal and NIL culture we're currently in, agents are kind of exercising their due diligence when it comes to Army edge defender Elo Mendoza, and they, caught his attention and pointed out that there could be several P5 programs that might be interested in him. And, maybe said something to the effect of, hey, timing's everything. And because Georgia lost one of their top edge defenders, Mikael Williams, who got picked in the first round, obviously, by the Niners. Roddy, what are your thoughts around that? And, it's one thing to be a standout or a superstar at Army West Point. It's an entire other thing when you're competing with the best players in the country at UGA. What do you anticipate in terms of competition for LO when fall camp arrives?
I'll put it this way. Uh, well, Georgia needed one. Let's start there. They needed two, really. They went after Bo Atkinson out of the University of North Carolina. They wanted him really bad because they, as you say, they lost Michael Williams. They lost Jalen Walker, who also plays on the edge. He also won the first round. Both were juniors. Uh, they had a guy transfer, and David Wilson went to Missouri, and he was worried that Georgia wasn't going to use him the way that he wanted to be used. So that left them with basically two scholarship guys on the edge. So not a lot to make it through the SEC. And this year,
Yeah.
Georgia hosts Texas, they host Alabama, they host Ole Miss, they go to Tennessee. I mean, it's one of the toughest schedules in the nation. So you can see how Kirby Smart is like, we need an edge defender. We need somebody who can do it. Now, the first thing Georgia does is when they recruit, because they usually have one of the best recruiting classes in the nation, is it's very similar to your guys making tape. You know, what's your height? What's your weight? What's your arm length? What's your speed? They have some very strict criteria. And in order to make an exception on that criteria, you have to be exceptional at something. So if you're not tall enough to be a cornerback, let's say they set their cornerbacks at 6 foot and you show up at 5'10", then you have to have exceptional speed to make an exception for your height. You have to have exceptional reach or something else. Uh, so to give Elo credit, he hit their criteria in every facet. So even if
Wow.
he hadn't been at Army, if he'd been at Little Sisters of the Poor, they'd have been like, okay, he checks the boxes. Now can he play? And you go
Okay.
back and watch the tape against him in Notre Dame. You're like, okay, well, he can play. So
Yeah.
now how can we get him? Is he available? Now, Kirby Smart brought this up the other day, and I thought it was fascinating. And he brought it up out of frustration because he said, we have agents who invite us to Zoom calls like this one. And this is before the portal opens. And they say, we're going to show you 25 players we know are going into the portal. Now, again, before it even opens, are you interested in joining our Zoom call? So there's an army of agents out there, excuse the pun, who are trying to get their 10%, their 15%, their 6%, whatever it is. They're talking to players. The players are like, I'm interested. Well, what's available? If I called you today and said, hey, I know you live in Buford, but would you be willing to move to Tampa? I've got a job for you. You'd be like, tell me some details. I
Yeah.
mean, be a moron not to. So
Right.
this Zoom call before the portal even opens is the invitation to it is being sent out to all these coaches saying, here, come look at our 25 players that are going to go in the portal. So the coaches don't even have to scour the ranks, if you will, of the schools out there to find
It's
somebody
the kind of discovery work, to use a sales term, is kind of being done for the coaches ahead of time
by the agents.
by the agents.
Now, that is still legal because you're not talking directly to the player. The player puts his name in the portal. That means you can talk to me directly, but you can talk to his dad, you can talk to his mom, you can talk to his agent, you can talk to his recruiter, you can talk to whoever. And so again, I don't know how this worked out with Elo specifically, but I will say that Georgia took 9 other players in the transfer pool. And I can go with it. Let's go back 1 year because this is one I know the details of exactly. Trevor Etienne, Florida running back, number
Yep.
2 back there, but basically considered to be their number one, and would especially been their number one last year. He goes into the portal. No one hears anything from him for about 6 weeks, but we knew the minute he went in the portal, he was coming to Georgia. We put
Oh
in our
wow.
predictions, and every time somebody else popped up, Quinshon Judkins, who went from Ole Miss to Ohio State, everyone's like, "Hey, are they going after Quinshon?" I'm like, "They're getting Trevor Etienne. I don't. Do they take two?" So,
Right.
I mean, we sometimes where the kid's going in. Kirby Smart and a lot of the other coaches will tell you the minute they come to the office, sit down and say, "Hey, I'm going in the portal." A lot of them already know their destination. Heck, some of them even put in the "do not contact" right, tag saying, don't contact me. So
Wow.
my point is, a lot of this is done prior to the portal opening, and that it's all done behind closed doors. When the contacts first started with the players, you could reach out to a player, hey, who's contacted you? He'd give you a list. But now you have to go through his agent. The agent was telling you false names to
Wow.
kind of blow his kid up, saying, "Oh, no, we got UNC, we got Ohio
Just
State,
making
Georgia,
stuff
Alabama."
up.
I'm like, you're hearing from Presbyterian, and
Yeah.
MTSU. Don't lie to me. But it's gotten very hard to find out exactly what happened. So we don't know the details that went with Elo, but for a guy, everybody around the country could see who that was. You're think of a agent reaching out to him saying, "Look, I bet I can get you a great deal." Absolutely. Now, I'm not going to say that he's not getting paid a lot, because I would assume that he is because of his potential. I don't know the exact amounts, but I will say that you know you go from there are kids making over there are walk-on kids making $100,000. Yeah, there are, and a lot of the fake news out there saying these quarterbacks are getting $4 and $8 million. That's not true. But I will say that Caleb Downs, the great Ohio State safety, he was at Alabama, freshman All American. Year two, he's about to come to Georgia. Georgia was going to pay him $30,000 a month. I can say I know that because I know who was going to do it. I knew the company that was going to pay him $30,000,
Mhm.
put him on all their billboards. Caleb Downs represents our company.
Yeah.
He had a uh, he was enrolled in classes. He had an apartment picked out. Uh, Knew exactly what day he was going to start classes. And then last second, he went to Ohio State, who offered him $100,000 a month. So I can tell you for a fact there are certain players that get 1.2 million for their year of that year. Now again, they all do it monthly, mainly
Okay.
because you just don't know how
So
long a
it's
kid's
more
going to
of
be
a
there. What if you
month
leave
to
early?
month
So
type of commitment slash salary slash whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
now you have got, and everyone's making a big deal out of Arkansas trying to get money back from Madden and Loviala, or whatever how you say his last name, Nico's little brother.
Yeah.
That started last year when Georgia opened the portal or when the portal opened for Georgia the first time. They basically signed new deals with most of their players, and a lot of those had buyouts in them. So I mentioned Damon Wilson, the edge defender, who's one of the top players in the nation when he's recruited, who's now gone to Missouri. The first couple of schools that reached out to him were, "Hey, we can't believe you're in the portal. We can't wait to talk to you." And he was going to make, I think, about $800,000. He had like a $600,000 buyout. So the
Wow.
schools that wanted to get him had to pay the buyout to Georgia that he had agreed to.
Okay, so some players do have a buyout as part of
Absolutely.
their deal.
And Georgia enforced one
A lot
last
of us
year or
weren't aware
last
of that, I
months
don't
ago.
think, because a lot of people thought that's a good way to maybe slow some of this down, but depends
No,
how
it's
bad
true.
you want a kid, I
The,
guess.
the, the only way I can see this slowed down, because a lot of people say, well, when we get the house settlement, that'll fix everything. Like, okay,
Oh,
now
well,
all of a sudden the TV money's being spread out, but if you still
right,
want a Caleb Downs or a Nico or anybody, you want a top quarterback, you want a top wide receiver, you're still going to add, hey, everybody's getting, $80,000. We still got $1 million offer for you. So
right.
the only way I can see that changing is if the schools can sign kids to basically the kids have to, in their contracts, sign over their NIL rights. Hey, this is a school. We're about to pay you $800,000 to play football for us. We own your name, image, and likeness rights. You can't sell them again because that's what we are paying for. I don't see that happening. I don't see how the schools are going to
Yeah,
be able to get away with that. It would make sense if the school's paying you TV money, you
right.
know,
That there's
then
part.
that's how it should go. But uh, every time that it goes to courts, the courts are any, if you or I trying to start a business, the court almost always sides on the person who's trying to make a living. And it's
Yeah.
a very tough for the government, for
Right.
local rules, the state to say this person can't make a living in that manner. The courts hate that. They don't like to put any restrictions on our ability to make a living. So that'd be the same with the players. The players are getting paid, and the schools are saying, "No, we own your entire name, image, and likeness." The court's going to say, "Well, that's a bit much." You know,
Yeah.
you're using their name, image, and likeness on all of your stuff, but how does that limit you? How does it hurt you from letting the kid go further than what the school's paying? So I know I'm getting far afield here, but just the idea of
No, this is great
it's not going
conversation.
to
I think it's a lot
change
of insight
immediately.
because, the Army fan base, like obviously everybody's got their opinions. I mean, this has been because of Mendoza and because of Udo, this has become a super hot topic with us that it really never was prior to this year. We've lost kids, but not of that caliber before. And so it's, and a lot of us, honestly, because we don't deal in it every day like the SEC teams do and the Big Ten teams do. It's we're honestly a little bit ignorant about how the whole thing works. So
Well,
the
here's the other
education's
thing.
very appreciated. I'm meeting with another guest who runs a different podcast for Army. He's also a grad. I'm meeting with him later this week. And he and I are going to talk about some of this as well. So, and he's down right in the heart of SEC country in Huntsville, Alabama, and real close to the Tide and everybody like that too. So, when it comes to Mendoza specifically, Roddy, you mentioned he met all the measurables, he checked all the boxes there. What else about him caught the eyes of the Georgia coaching staff?
Mentality. I mean, a if, and I really think that there's been kind of I think he is going to, and I know your readers don't want to hear this, but he is going to put a lot more eyes on Army because here's the thing: when you go get someone out of the portal, the first question you want to ask them is, "Why the hell are you in the portal? You committed to school X. You were a teammate of those guys. Why are you willing to leave them? Are you willing to leave them just for money? Is that all that matters to you? Are you willing
Yeah,
to leave them just for playing? Are you putting yourself ahead of the team? You can go out and get a bunch of mercenaries and it
yeah,
not work out. We saw this right when the NIL first happened. Texas A&M, they didn't. This wasn't the transfer portal. They went recruiting wise, and there's that kind of legendary $30 million recruiting class, and it wasn't $30 million, but it was a lot.
it was a
Uh,
lot.
you brought in a ton of I don't want to call them prima donnas, but you brought in some of the best talent in the nation. They couldn't gel. They weren't teammates.
They it's funny because I talked to a lot of Army coaches, not just the football staff. And we primarily cover football, as you know, but we also cover a lot of other sports at Army. And Army's having success across the board. Our lacrosse team's top five in the nation. Our wrestling team was top 25 this year. Pretty much everything except basketball we're good at this point. So
That's
it's
awesome.
uh it's interesting when you talk to coaches, and I think I saw it a lot this year in the American Conference, right? People are like, "Oh, Army's entering the American. How's that going to go for them?" Blah blah blah, and we come out and we just thrash everybody, including Tulane. And I think, other than the one school in Annapolis, but let's not talk about that. I still have PTSD. But so we come out and we just smoke everyone, and it's like, how is this happening in this era? And my hypothesis, it's just a theory and an opinion, but a lot of people do agree with it, is when you look at schools like Florida Atlantic and Tulane and South Florida, and they're building their entire rosters off of these mercenaries, basically, because guys are, oh, I'm fourth string at Bama, let me come over here. There's so many SEC transfers at these American schools. And other big Power Four conferences too. It's crazy, and you go, wow, that's a super talented team. We're gonna struggle with them. But no, because they're in a new system every year. They don't really care about each other. They're not going to go the extra mile for each other the way the Army kids just, I mean, there's a reason our offensive line was the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line this year, because those dudes will get in the trenches and rip your ever living skull off
Yeah,
for their brothers. And I think we could talk all day about the disadvantages of portal and NIL to Army, but there's some hidden advantages. I feel like I don't know if other people agree with me, but there's a reason we went 12-2.
absolutely. It's especially with the type of offense you run, it's assignment
Yeah.
football.
Yeah.
Same on defense. You got to trust that the guy is going to hoe his row and not try to pad his stats, not try to get a highlight reel play. And that's what you're seeing at some of these other schools where the guy who, like you said, was a fourth string wide receiver at Alabama. He goes to a smaller school. He's like, I went to Alabama. I've already made it, but now I'm going to show you yokels how to play. And I've got
Yeah.
the reason I'm leaving. Again, first thing Kirby asked him is, why did you leave? I'm trying to get my stats up. I'm trying to get my clips up. I'm trying to show the NFL what I can do. Okay, well, if you come here, we've already loaded at that position,
Right.
and when I'll go back a bunch of years, Georgia's 2012 defense, you had a bunch of guys come back after 2011. A ton of seniors came back. And this was a team that should have destroyed everybody's. And so many of them were drafted. It was mind boggling. Um, that was a mediocre defense.
Mm,
Everybody was trying to I don't say pad their stats, but basically make a name for themselves. So
yeah.
when you had all these high end guys, they could not play together. They couldn't play for each other. That's what you saw at Texas A&M go
Yeah.
last year in the portal. Ole Miss went out and bought a team. Big Lane Kiffin fan. I like what he's doing, and he
Yeah.
understands it's tough to recruit to Ole Miss. But they
Yeah.
went out and got some fantastic players from around the nation, and they won a lot of games. So I mean,
Yeah.
talent's going to talent. There's no question about
Yeah.
it.
That's
But can it be a
Jeff
championship
Monken's
talent?
got a great quote that I love. He says, "Physical superiority cancels all theory."
Yeah, exactly. It really does. And that's why Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, especially in his first 2 years, I mean, you go back and look at, you had 37 players drafted off of Georgia's 2021 championship team. They're the guys that played a lot of snaps. How do
Now
you
they're
beat?
winning Super Bowls, basically.
Yeah, yeah. They
When
want to
people
say
say,
they turn around, a bunch of them go to Philadelphia, win a Super
yeah.
Bowl. How do you beat that? You can't. But you can't stack talent like that anymore. That's why Nick Saban's out of the business because
Yeah.
his third string were guys waiting, or he had first rounders playing third string, waiting for their chance to get in there. So did Kirby Smart. That's where he learned it. He learned it at Alabama. You can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So what they do now is they look for guys who are a culture fit. Georgia is lucky they can pick and choose out of the transfer portal. They don't
Yeah.
spend the most. They get beat out a lot because they just won't spend it. A
Yeah.
lot of times they don't have it. And I know it sounds weird to say that Georgia doesn't have the
Yeah,
money,
that
but
is that's a surprise to me, to be
they have a
honest with you.
lot. But
Mhm.
think about it. If you were go back to Ohio State,
Right.
how many times did they lose to Michigan?
Back in the day, never. Now all
Yeah,
the
but
time.
recently, so
Yeah.
those Ohio State fans were livid,
Yeah.
frustrated, ticked off. And when
Yeah.
Ryan Day says, "Hey, we need to work in the transfer portal," they just hand over a blank check.
Yeah. It's
Fill in
like,
the number, coach.
we got to
Georgia
do
won
what we got
back
to
to
do
back
to beat
titles, and you go to
Michigan.
them
Yeah.
saying, "Bill, hey, how much? We need a lot of money." They're like, "People will be happy to come play at Georgia because you win championships," and they think that that matters to the players. It doesn't, but it's I mean, they want to win, but again, their whole goal is to get to the NFL.
Yeah.
So if I can make a lot more money at Florida, who hasn't won a title in forever, I'm gonna go to Florida instead of Georgia. So Georgia was behind for a while, and then they finally started making, people started ponying up and to get at least even in the NIL
No, it
race.
makes sense. I mean, you do, everybody thinks that Georgia is a big money school, and they sort of are, but you're right, not compared to like Ohio State, Michigan, A&M, UT. Those schools kind of, in my opinion, I think their revenue's at a different level, probably.
Teams that are twice as big, but also who are a lot more frustrated because they haven't won a title in forever. Look at the
Yeah.
frustrations at Tennessee. I mean, you remember when Phil Fulmer was there, that was
Oh
they were winning
yeah.
titles.
Yep. Mhm.
Florida, desperate. Auburn,
Yeah, Florida
desperate.
hasn't been the same since the Urban Meyer days,
Yeah, but
really.
they're spending
So,
money now because they got
yeah.
people behind it, and it's a much bigger school, much bigger alumni base. My point, and is to keep it back to Elo, is you can't bring in just the highest paid guys and have an actual team because everybody's going to be looking at what deal do you have? Why are you bringing a guy that makes more than me? Oh, you're bringing him in, then I'm going to leave. So they went to a guy like Elon. They're like, this guy understands team first. This guy understands mission. He understands, being part of a group who has to work together. So I'm just telling you that coaches understand that I can go get the kid that I can spend the most money, or I can get the kid who will take good money, but also is a net overall addition to the locker room. And that's the first thing
Makes
Kirby Smart
sense.
said about him, or anybody I spoke to about him said, "Hey, this is a good kid." I'm like,
Yeah.
and you always expect the coaches to say they're a good kid. A
Right.
lot of times they don't, and sometimes that's telling.
You got to
But
read between
they
the
said the
lines,
same thing
I
about Jaden
guess.
Harris
What
when he
they're
came
not
in from
saying
Miami.
is,
Yeah. Hey, Trevor Etienne was a leader right off the bat.
yeah,
It's like, wait a minute, you were from Florida, the arch rival, and you're coming here to be a part of the Georgia Bulldogs. You could just see there's maybe a standoffish attitude towards him when he came to the locker room. He won that locker room over in 15 minutes. They loved him.
wow,
So
nice.
that's what you're looking for is you want talent, but you also want a fit because all at the upper level, they're all talented.
Yeah,
But can they put aside their personal agendas to play for the team?
yeah,
Elo had proven he could do that 2 years in a row. So
yep,
I'm just saying, if I'm coaches or if I'm a coach out there, I'm looking at an Army. You got a kid that's even halfway
yeah.
decent.
Ugh.
He's going to be a good locker room kid. And how much is he making? What? Nothing.
Not
I can
a
get him for his steal.
techni-
So I don't know
technically.
if
I
this is going
think
to get
they, I
better,
think
brother.
they make about $800 a month. That's their cadet salary. I think,
I
unless
think
it's
we can
gone
get
up
him
a
for
lot in the
the
last couple
change
of
and the
years.
couch.
Young grads, you can correct me. I know what it was when we were there, so I'm just factoring in inflation. It's probably about what they're making. So the
Of course, I mean, there's if they can go on and play something big, make it to the NFL, then that's different. But there's nothing like a Army education. It's
Yeah, and that's right. That's I mean the selling point for Army remains the same, right? And it's
yeah,
tough to get, one of the things that the coaches have been talking about, and even the other guy I'm going to meet with later this week, is it's tough to get a 19 or 20-year-old to be able to think 20, 30 years down the road. When you look at the average salary of West Point grads compared to any other school, we're right there at the top with like the Harvards and the Yales of the
oh yeah,
world. Most of the Fortune 500 companies and uneven percentage of them, the CEOs are academy grads. It's
exactly. Oh
it's
yeah, that's
and it's
that's
just it's how do you get a 20-year-old? That's what the coaches are selling when they recruit, and it's working on the recruiting trail.
yeah,
I mentioned the wrestling program. They had the number 7 recruiting class in the country this year. And I think one of the, again, hidden advantages of the portal and NIL is you have so many coaches who are primarily recruiting the portal, it does leave more talented high school kids sometimes for the smaller schools, especially a school like Army, who's going to attract that type of kid. Now, the challenge, though, for the coaching staff is we got to recruit them out of high school. We got to recruit them after prep year. We got to recruit them after plebe year and after yearling year. Once we lock them in junior year, okay, then we're pretty good at
yeah.
that point. There's got to be a weird
But
exception for the academy to let them go. One of the things we're talking about is maybe make the commitment, and maybe this causes us some recruits on the front end, but maybe once they start sophomore year instead of junior year, now you're locked into the commitment. That's something we've been because not a lot of our kids make the field freshman year. You got to be
yeah,
pretty exceptional. Udo did. even Elo didn't play a ton on defense freshman year. He primarily played special teams. So, that's kind of what the coaches have to deal with. Just the staff is super frustrated because they're like, gosh, we take these kids, we develop them, we work with them for 2 years, and then it's like,
Oh
and
yeah,
the other thing that makes me worry, and I think makes the Army fan base worry, is at what point do some of these bigger schools start realizing Nate Woody is one heck of a defensive coordinator? We've been in the top five in defense in the last couple of years, and he's doing it and he's developing all these kids that are being poached by bigger programs now. At what point does somebody slap down a massive check? There's always with Monken and with Cody Worley, our offensive coordinator, there's always like the stigma of the option offense, which I think keeps us safe a little bit, which is funny to me, but whatever. I
yeah.
won't get into that. What, you don't think they could run a different offense if they went to a
Yeah,
bigger?
that's my pet peeve about every offensive
It's like
coordinator.
it's so stupid. I'm just like these administrators are morons, but whatever. Win for us. But defensively, and I mean, I guess example one was Jay Bateman got, he's at A&M now with Mike Elko. He was at UNC with Mac Brown. And that's kind of what we worry about with Woody is people are going to wake up and go, this guy can flat out coach defense. We need to take him. So I know, at
But that's
UGA,
that's
you
the
guys have
double-edged sword of being good.
right.
I mean, once you're good, the coaches, you hope that you can keep your coaches, keep your players. You can't.
Yeah. And I'm like, players can be replaced, even and especially the system we have at Army, it is so based on because we know we're never going to have superior talent, it's based on the team playing well together as a unit. So while it hurts to lose an Elo Mendoza, while it hurts to lose a Kanye Udo, not that super concerned about it, to be honest with you. But it's when the coaches start getting taken that you see the drop off
Well, I will say
typically.
this about the coaches. I mean, the number one criticism right now from Georgia fans is they all hate Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, which is
I know.
beyond ridiculous. I mean, I'm not a Mike Bobo fan. I'm not against him. I'm not for him. I mean, I've known him. I covered him.
Yeah.
I started in '93. I was there when he was a student. I've known Mike his, his whole adult life, but we're not buddies. I'm not in his wedding or anything like that. But I do sometimes I get called a Mike defender because I don't call for his ouster. And the number one criticism of him is, well, he's been fired from 3 jobs. I'm like, every coach gets fired or they
That's
quit.
coaching.
Yeah,
That
yeah. So
right?
I'm
I
like,
grew up, my dad was a coach. Now my dad was a little different, but the guys he coached with, the head football coaches he coached with, always they never unpacked their moving boxes
yeah,
because they knew
exactly.
every couple of years they were going to get canned
That's the thing.
because
So I will say this, Kirby Smart had Mel Tucker as a defensive coordinator, loses him, hires Dan Lanning. Nobody knew who the hell Dan Lanning was. Dan Lanning's blown up. He's
one of the
got
best coaches on the
Glenn Schumann.
planet.
Yeah,
Gosh.
Glenn Schumann was his first hire. That's his defense
Yeah.
coordinator now. Glenn Schumann's been interviewed by NFL teams to be the guy. He's
Yeah.
sticking around for now. I mean, by the end of the year, though, he'll have more offers. But my point is, when you have a good coach um, and you lose him, you feel like the world's ending. It's like, but there are always other great coaches out there who've
Yep.
seen you can have success there, and they see that as a stepping stone to another, something even bigger, or they love the hell the go there and play coach that. So, because I mean, if not, why would anybody ever coach Vandy? You
Oh
know,
yeah.
why would anybody coach a Tulane or a South
Yeah.
Alabama?
Well, it
So
was funny. I was in the media
coach can
room after the
coach.
American
Prove
Conference
yourself.
Championship. Everybody was freaking out that Summerall was leaving Tulane like immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a good thing with people teams are coming after your coaches, but there's always going to be another
Yeah.
one in the background. I mean, I talked to a lot of the younger coaches in the industry, and there are some brilliant minds out there who just want a shot. So
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think, because I've always is interesting talking about Mike Bobo. And I know there's a lot of heat on him all the time. And my whole thing is always like Their offense isn't bad. I mean, they're pretty effective. So, I get that there's always like the young, hot offensive mind out there. But if you notice, other than in a few cases, I feel like that never works, right? I mean, you look at
It
the
doesn't.
NFL, some of the old school guys, Andy Reid is still getting it done with Kansas City, right? It's like who are kind of, I mean, what does the Georgia fan base like? What are they looking for from an OC that they don't think Bobo provides them?
They worried because Georgia scored so few points in the first half of those other games. They're like, "Hey, we're coming. We went into halftime down. Why?" And they get frustrated. And they want to score 40 points, and they want to put up the numbers that they did under Todd Monken. Now, I'm not going to rip on Todd Monken. I think he's a great offensive coordinator.
No, he's
They
amazing.
also
Yeah.
had a lot better players. I mean, you had an offensive line that was just, I mean, Broderick Jones, Jamari Sawyer, just ridiculous offensive linemen, Trey Hill, guys who were starting in the NFL. You did have three guys drafted this year. A lot of times they were hurt. So, and Kirk, go back to the first 2 years ago when it was Mike Bobo's first year back, he's averaging 40 points a game and number two in the SEC in offensive production. He didn't have it this year, so now he's terrible. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
nobody was whining and complaining 2 years ago when he took him. He went undefeated in the regular season, blowing teams out.
Right.
They lost to Alabama on a fluke turnover. So then they destroyed an FSU team. My point is, what do fans want? They want to win, and when they're
All
not
the
winning,
time.
you look for things to blame. And Mike didn't win a title when he was here the first time under Mark Richt, so
Yeah.
it's his fault. Even though the defense was one of Kirby Smart's worst in his tenure here, they never gave the ball to the offense on the plus side of the field. They had very few turnovers. They couldn't get off the field, and you led the nation in drops. So my point is, it was a weird year. They won the SEC. Kirby Smart will tell you it was his best coaching year ever. And
Hmm.
I'll agree with him because the schedule was insane. The
Yeah.
injuries off the charts, one of the most beat up teams I've ever
They
seen.
were very banged up. Yeah.
But they still won the SEC with less talent and less uh, playmakers. Then I mean, you don't have a Brock Bowers, you don't have a Lad McConkey.
Right.
Todd Munkin did, and when
Yeah.
Mike Bobo had him for 1 year, even though they were hurt most of the year,
Yeah.
he went undefeated. So my point is, it's players make the game, but we blame the coaches because we don't want to blame the players. So
Right.
even though you had almost 40 drop passes,
Yeah.
that's still the coach's fault because they don't teach them to
Right.
catch, apparently.
Well,
So
and I'm wondering too, now that these kids are basically de facto professional athletes, like when can we start criticizing them the way we criticize
there's been a
NFL
shift.
guys?
There's absolutely been a shift. It's like, well, that guy's not worth what we're paying him, but we don't know what we're paying
We
him.
don't know
So
what we're paying them. That's the problem.
how far do you go? How far do you go in on ripping the kid when maybe he's just not making as much as anybody else? So
Right. Last question for you, Roddy, and I really appreciate your time. This has been super insightful, so thank you. Other big wins and losses for UGA in the portal since spring ball.
Zachariah Branch. This was a kid. He's 5 foot and nothing. He's a tiny guy. I think he's like 5'10", 185 pounds. He was a 5-star recruit in Rivals. Went to University of Southern Cal as a true freshman. Had 700 yards returning. Freshman All American return kid. Basically a slot receiver,
Wow.
twitchy, fast, can. And last year as a sophomore, just everyone realized how good he is. Started kicking away from him. Didn't give him the opportunities. Now he's at Georgia. They need a slot guy, so that's a big one for them. They got Noah Thomas, the 6'6" wide receiver, who was the leading receiver at Texas A&M. But he was recruited by James Coley, who is now Georgia's wide receivers
Hmm.
coach. Rejoined Coach Coley. So this was a team that led the nation in drop passes last year.
Hmm.
Now you're bringing in Noah Thomas, Texas A&M's top guy, one of the best receivers out of Southern Cal, and you add them to a pretty decent wide receiver group. So and the number one thing they needed was an edge guy. They got it in Elo. So the portal, which is, I mean, Georgia's lost, 24 players 2 years ago,
Hmm.
29 players last year in the portal. It's stuff you come to Georgia, you expect to be a starter.
Yeah,
This is national champions
right.
gave me a sign, gave me a deal. And you get here and you realize there's a lot of players who are
See,
much
a
better than
ton of
me.
talent.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, so you're like, well, but I could go play at Missouri. I mean, Jermaine Johnson, guy who transferred into Georgia, played 1 year and was like, hey, I'm really good, but they're not letting me get a lot of sacks. He went to Florida State, was a first round draft pick. They let him get a lot of sacks at Florida State, and I wish Jermaine all the luck in the world. But there are a lot of other guys that come to Georgia who go elsewhere, and they couldn't start at Georgia, but they start there, and they sometimes some make it, some don't. But it's Kirby is using the transfer portal to his advantage because yeah, you lose 29 guys, but you get to replace 29.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, thanks a ton, Roddy. We really appreciate your time today. Good luck to you guys and the dogs throughout the season. We'll be following you, paying close attention as I always do. And I know we have a lot of other Southerners who are West Point grads who are on our rival site. So excited about that. Army fans, big week coming up. We've got interviews coming up with Steve Kripke from Crawdad's Countdown to Kickoff. We've got interviews with Bryson Daly and Max DiDomenico's parents as they get ready for graduation and to send their sons off into the Army. And the Army's going to gain two great leaders there. So we're excited about that. And go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. Subscriptions are up, so keep them coming. And we're really excited about what the 2025 season will hold. Go Army, beat Navy.